First Nation Perspectives to Living on the Land by Luke Blue Eagle, a Metis Shaman from Canada. Hosted by Radha Cohen. This is ConsciousEarthAlliance.com.
Next would be Blue Eagle, please.
Great. Thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be a part of this group for the second time. The subject is very close to all of our interests and preoccupation and seeing what's happening. I was interested in eco-villages for a very long time. But I've been working also with indigenous elders from many different First Nations for many, many years and many lifetimes. And there's something we need to understand about life in nature, is that when you live completely immersed in nature, the need for spiritual practice is not as important as it is in our modern societies, because everything in nature will guide you towards a spiritual way of life. Everything in nature is alive. And if you're not able to communicate with nature, your community will have trouble surviving. And that is knowledge that is present in all indigenous nations all over the world. You know, all indigenous nations all over the world from millennia and millennia in the past have all had a very specific way of manifesting their spirituality, and that is called shamanism. There are different kinds of shamanism, of course, but it is universal. All indigenous nations all across the world have a very powerful spirituality that can actually bend the laws of nature, that can communicate with the elements of nature, that can communicate with the animal world, with the elemental world, with the rock world, that can influence the world around them. And these are powerful shamanic practitioners that exist in all of the native nations all across the planet. And it's not something that is something that we need to understand, that spirituality is natural to living in the world. It is not something that you have to acquire. If you're living in nature, you have to be mindful. You have no choice. If you're not mindful, you might put your foot in the nest of the wasps that have built a nest close to the community, or you can fall off a cliff, or the canoe can go away in the river and you've lost your locomotion back to the community. Or you have to be mindful all the time. When you're walking in nature, if you're not mindful of where you're walking, you won't find your way back, and you develop your memory to an extreme level, and everything around you is true. There are no lies in nature. So everything that you see around you and the multiple stimuli that you get from all the sounds and all the colors and all the animals and all the stones, it's constantly moving all around you. So your stimuli is like 1,000 times stronger than what you would get in a classroom between 2 or 4 walls, where there is no movement and where the walls themselves are dead. So this education that you receive in nature is automatically spiritually oriented, because you are in the living world, and what animates the living world is spirit. And that's what a shaman does. He communicates with the spirits of things, the spirits of the ancestors, the spirits of the animals, the spirits of the stones, the spirits of the plants. And through this, he can make very powerful occurrences happen for his community. Very naturally and very powerfully. And so one thing that I have noticed as I evolved through the many years of training with the shamanic people is that they are incredibly powerful, but at the same time, they are incredibly humble, because they know the real place in the whole scheme of things. They know exactly where they have to be. And when you're living in nature, you automatically develop a kind and nurturing and service mentality, because in a community, everybody has to work together. You have no choice. In society, people can, go wherever they want and do whatever they want, because the functioning is based on money and not on human values. But in a nature-based community, you have no choice to be kind and serving, because if you're not, everybody around you is going to start pointing a finger and you say, what are you doing in our community, you know? And so there's a natural kind of education towards being kind and loving that happens naturally. And of course, people are always together. In our society, people are isolated from one another. But in community, nature community, indigenous nature community, the people are together all the time. They work together. The children are with the parents all the time. Everybody works together, plans together. They have council meetings with the elders. They have council meetings with the women. They have council meetings with the men. They have council meetings with the children. Everybody has a voice in the council and the way things are decided in the community. And even the animals and the plants and the elements have a word, because the shamans in the community are listening to them and they're bringing their voices to those community councils. And so the need for spiritual practices when you're living in nature is not of the same need, because everything around you is true, everything around you is real, everything that you're living is teaching you in a multidimensional ways with incredible stimuli, and you have very powerful shamanic practitioners that are showing you that spirit can influence the world around you. What works to help the people develop on a spiritual level is the ceremonies that the people do. And there's a lot of ceremonies in indigenous life. The ceremonies are ways of giving thanks back to nature and developing those community-oriented methods of offerings that will initiate the communication with your environment. You know, the way, for example, it's one example of that comes to mind is the hunt. As I am living way up north, of course, people have no choice but to eat animal protein, and they have a very different body compared to people down south, you know, because they accumulate fat, and the fat, they take it from the animals, you know, because they need that fat, you know, on the epidermal level to withstand high levels of cold. And they honor the animals, you know, they have a very powerful relationship with the animals that, you know, you'll see the shaman of the community, you know, he'll drum in the evening, and the next morning he says, we're going to this place that's about 3 canoe days of a ride, and at this time on this day 3 caribou will appear. We'll kill 2 of them, and the other one will stand there, and he will bring our messages back to the rest of the community. And that caribou is bringing those that need to leave the herd. So that's the kind of communication that the people have. And of course, when they have killed the caribou, they will then honor the caribou. There's different practices that they do to be at one with the spirit of the caribou. And that is for everything, you know, it's for the plants, it's for the elements. And, you know, there's a very deep relationship, and that's established through ceremony. And of course, the power of shamanic ceremonies compared to what I've seen in religions is no comparison, you know, especially, for example, the rites of passage, which are so important in the life of a human being. You know, what's created in our society, for example, by what they call the adolescence or the adolescent crisis, you know, the phases that the young people go through to become an adult, does not exist in indigenous society, because they have a rite of passage. And so the child goes from being a child to an adult in a few days, and he'll never forget the lessons he learns. And it's the same thing for marriage. The divorce was very rare in indigenous society because of the rites of passage and the way things was prepared, and the way also that people were not influenced by religious dogma that puts fear and all kinds of wrong ideas in the people's mind around sex. You know, they see that sexuality is natural all around them in nature, that everything is sexual, and that's completely natural, and they don't have to have any kind of shame about it. It's the way they handle it in the community that becomes important. You know, every single different nation have different ways. It's not the way you do things, it's honoring every person in their relationship and giving them the liberty to experience love to its utmost, that becomes important. And there are ways of doing that. And that's what happens in indigenous society, is that teachings are not passed on through books. Teachings are passed on through person-to-person transmission. And it's just as efficient. Our history, example of our history is a very good example. Our history goes back 127,000 years, a bit more, 127,500 and some years. And if you look at societies today, the civilizations, this is 12,000 years, and they hardly know their history, because everything has been covered up by those that are manipulating humans for their power and financial gain. So a lot of the information that concerns our real history has been hidden. For example, all the genocides that have happened to indigenous people all over the world, because one of the characteristics of indigenous people is that they're free. They don't need the financial system. They don't need society. They don't need civilization. They don't want it. They want to remain in the very harmonious and loving environment in which they are, where everything is alive around them, where everything, where there's very few diseases, and where there's a lot of love, a lot of caring, and a lot of spirituality through, some of the nations. If we talk about the Hopi Nation, for example, they have more days in ceremony than they have days without ceremony. Well, that's a lot of spiritual practice right there. But this is something that is experienced the people together, and the people that are leading this, what we call the shamans or the medicine people, they have to prove to the community. They just can't assume a title and say, I'm reverend or pope or whatever. They have to prove to the community that they can actually bend the laws of nature by doing extraordinary things that nobody else can do. There's always tests. So that that this person is the real game, is the real thing, and that's one thing that is completely absent in what I've seen in spirituality and other cultures, in religions, well, for the most part, because religions are not really spiritual. They are ways to manipulate humanity. I'm sorry for all of those who are in some kind of religion, but what I've seen, from a very young age on, I was very Catholic, first because I've been spiritual my whole life. So when my father brought me to my first communion, I wanted him to bring me every morning. It was wonderful, the incense, the music, and the people praying. I love that ambiance, but I soon discovered that everything they were telling me were lies, because the power of the ceremony was not there. And at confirmation, they were supposed to receive the 7 gifts of the Great Spirit, so after the bishop slapped me and I didn't slap him back, I went out in the woods and I waited for the 7 gifts of the Great Spirit, of the Holy Ghost, and never came. And so I stopped believing in that. And when I met the indigenous people, and they would put me on the mountain and say, this is what's going to happen, it did happen. There was truth in those words. There was power in those ways of doing. So actually, the Earth is going, as somebody mentioned with the polar shift, the Earth is going to do a major cleansing. We've seen this happen. It's going to be the 4th time. It started actually in 1969. It's been ongoing since then. We tried to advise the world population about this, but they wouldn't listen to us. We were completely ignored, and genocide policies continued to unfurl upon the people ever since. There has not been any let up, even recently, and some of the most powerful indigenous healers in the Quebec province were poisoned. It's ongoing. This has always been ongoing. It's a miracle that we're still there, actually. And so this purification that we've seen happen every time humanity loses its way will help people, as one of the speakers just mentioned. It will bring the people back to what's real. How do you eat? If you're not doing your garden, you can't eat. And if you're not in tune with the elements, how are you going to protect your garden against the many catastrophes that can happen upon the land because of the elements that have gone chaotic because humans are not doing the ceremonies anymore? The ceremonies are what control the elements. For example, coming back to the Hopi people, because they live mostly out of agriculture. They don't have any hunting, or very little bit, but a very, very, very less than most nations. They make gardens, and they make gardens in the desert, and they're planting things that need a lot of water, like corn and squash and beans. These are fruit staples that need plant staples that need a lot of water, and how do they do this? They do this with ceremony, and it's been documented. There's a book, or there's this Christian priest, actually, who went to live with them, and he's described how this old man, he was 90 years old, he would run 14 miles to his garden. And then as he was tilling the land around the corn, there was a cloud above him, and he was following him, and the water was falling everywhere he was walking. He saw this with his eyes, So, and I've read the same in different ways, of course, For example, when the native people in the beginning started listening to the Christian priests, or often they were forced into getting baptized, or whatever the religion they were accustomed with, they were often that, with a rifle, you become a Catholic, something like that. And they didn't do their ceremonies, that, the crops would be flooded with water and would rot in the ground, or there would be cyclones or tornadoes or whatever, because they weren't doing their ceremonies. The ceremony that you do with your community is what creates with the land and all the elements on the land the harmony that allows for your life there, because you have to be in interdependence with everything that is on the land. So that's the gist, that there's no question that spirituality is an essential part of living in nature, and all the nature-based communities that are creating will have no choice but to come back to this information, or else they won't survive. It's as simple as that. If you're not in harmony with nature that is changing at an incredible pace, because the Earth Mother needs to heal itself of everything that has been done to her. It's the same thing as when you catch a cold, a common cold, you'll have a fever, so you'll be sweating, you'll be shivering, you'll be evacuating both ends, you're clearing your system out of all the pollutants. Well, imagine that on a planetary scale. We're just like little bugs on that beast that's going to be shivering and sweating like that. So this is necessary, because we've lost so much, and it's all going to come back. We have prophets in our nations, and they see what's happening in the future, and it all comes back. But what does survive is indigenous nations, because they live completely immersed in nature. They have no technology and no need for technology. There's something we need to understand, that technology is dead. A car does not reproduce itself. A computer does not reproduce itself. It will fall eventually into disrepair, and you'll have to either repair it or buy another one, and that costs a lot to nature. If you're, rather than a car using a horse, well, it will reproduce itself, and it does no pollution. Actually, its excrements are excellent for the garden. And you can have a very meaningful relationship with the horse that you can't have with the car. So a lot of people cannot conceive of their way of life without technology, but that's what's going to happen. There's no choice about it. And those who see into the future what is going to happen does see that the happy people in the future are all indigenous nations. They're living in harmony with nature. There's very, very powerful spirituality. All the people are together, are happy. There are hardly any diseases anymore, as there was in the past, hardly any diseases. You won't find any bald people in native in communities. You won't find any cancer. You won't find any degenerative diseases. And the healers are incredibly powerful in those communities, and they can mend a broken bone in 30 minutes. I've seen incredibly powerful healings in the shamanic way, because they can actually work with the structure of space-time. They work, because everything is animated by spirit. What What manifests the world that we're in is spirit. And that's what a shaman does. He communicates with spirit. So actually, there's no limit to what the shamanic practitioners will do. And yet they remain very humble, and they're integrated into a community where they're no different from the others. They're just honored for what they're bringing to their community. But everybody is on the same level, you know. That's why in all indigenous communities, if you look at the way they decide things, they'll always be sitting in a circle, because in a circle, everybody sees everybody and everybody's equal. You know, so you can compare that with the governments today, you know, where they're all sitting in rows, you know, with the person in front there. It's not the way of the natural way. It's not the natural way, because we are in interdependence with everything around us, and everything is alive except technology. And that's what's destroying our Mother Earth. So we can't go back to nature right away. I feel that I've gone to the limit of what I can say.
Right, you're just there. We are just right. So, but it's time to end.
As I was requested this a few minutes ago, I haven't planned anything, so I'm going to let spirit guide the whole thing.
Hush.
Yeah. Also, a song, it's calling to be heard. It will help us to integrate all these beautiful teachings. We use it at the end of our ceremonies to all the spiritual teachings and energies will spiral and enter through top of head and integrate into body, so you never forget anything, and it stays with you. So I think it's calling for me to offer this. Yo no, hey, ya, ayo, ayo,